Hey guys, TLS here with another Warlords of Draenor beta video. In this video I'll be looking at Blood Death Knights. I'm looking into their major changes, their new changed and removed abilities, their new and changed glyphs, their new Draenor perks, and then finally their new changed and removed talents. Now, Blizzard really did some major reshuffling of Blood Death Knights in Warlords of Draenor. There are a lot of abilities that have just been changed around, and some very familiar abilities have been removed and you will no longer be using them. The first of their major changes is Riposte. Riposte is a new passive ability that will grant parry rating based on your critical strike. The new main tanking stat in Warlords of Draenor is bonus armor. Dodge and parry have been removed from all items. Like, you will no longer see dodge and parry as a stat on items. So several of the other secondary stats received kind of little small passives in each of the specs in Warlords of Draenor to grant those other secondaries some defensive value. So in this case, for Blood Death Knights, Riposte grants critical strike parry rating. The second major change, and this one's really weird, is that Heart Strike has been removed and you will now use Blood Boil in its place. Heart Strike, had that, that cleave ability, and now Blood Boil will take its place. To kind of further the strangeness of this, Blood Boil has been combined with Pestilence and subsequently the talent Rolling Blood. So now you'll be, AoE, spreading diseases, all in the same ability. It's kind of strange, but Blood Boil is your main ability now as a Blood Death Knight instead of Heart Strike. Rune Tap has been redesigned. It now will reduce all damage taken by 50% for 3 seconds. It also has 2 charges with a 40-second recharge time. So a little bit of a change there. Blizzard did this because of Resolve. Resolve is a new ability that causes a tank to gain extra absorption and heals, and they really didn't want Rune Tap playing off of that. So that is why the change has been made to kind of give a different defensive vibe for Blood Death Knights. Excuse me. Speaking of Resolve, Death Strike has had its heal increased, and it will interact with Resolve. That bubble that comes from the mastery and then the heal from Death Strike, that will all affect or be affected by Resolve, and that's to kind of put some more interactivity with the Death Knight and their tanking. So using Death Knight, you'll really feel the punch of that heal and bubble because of Resolve. Rune Strike was removed and Death Coil took its place. Death Coil, it's kind of another strange change, just like the Heart Strike. Rune Strike, Blizzard decided they did not want to have that ability in the game anymore. So now Death Coil is the main runic power spender for Death Knights. It's going to be very strange if you are really accustomed to playing Blood Death Knight in Mists of Pandaria. Now you will be using Blood Boil a lot, and you will be using Death Coil as your main runic power spender. Runic power now costs 30 runic power, so it's just going to be a small change there. It's really different. Other than those major changes, there's really just a big reshuffling of abilities for Blood Death Knights. There are going to be some abilities that I discuss in the abilities section that have been removed, but their main effects have been baked into different abilities. Sometimes those effects have been split between different abilities, but there are some cases in which those removed abilities, their passive effects are still in the game, just not in the spell book, but they will appear in the top right hand corner with your buffs. It's really strange how they've kind of molded Blood Death Knights in Warlords of Draenor. The last major change that I need to discuss for Death Knights in general really is that the 60 and 75 tiers of Death Knight have been swapped. Blizzard wanted to grant leveling Death Knights access to the rune regenerating abilities a little bit earlier in their life cycle, so instead of waiting till level 75, you now are able to get those abilities at level 60. There are a couple of new abilities for a Blood Death Knight. The first of these is Dark Sucker. This was an old glyph that would increase the healing of Death Strike based on whether or not you had just killed an opponent that granted experience or honor. You no longer have to glyph into it, it's now just a baseline glyph. Runic Strikes is a new ability that will cause the Death Knight to gain 5% more of the multi-strike stat from all sources, and your auto-attack multi-strikes with a two-handed weapon generate 15 runic power. Basically, this emphasizes multi-strike stat for Blood Death Knights. In tanking, you will be, focused on bonus armor, but multi-strike and critical strike will be some pretty prominent stats to take for a Blood Death Knight. Power of the Grave is a new kind of just raid utility buff. Its dark energy emanates from the Death Knight, granting all nearby party and raid members mastery. This is just it's another raid buff to bring to the raid. There are several changed abilities for Blood Death Knight. The first I've already discussed, and that's Blood Boil. It has been merged with Pestilence and also Rolling Blood. They've all been rolled into one, and you will be using that a lot as your main ability. Army of the Dead will no longer cause blood decays to take less damage when cast. However, the really cool thing is that it's instant cast now. It still takes the same amount of time for the ghouls to come out of the ground, but as you can see, I can run all over the place, and I don't have to worry about being interrupted in PvP. I mean, I can just cast Army of the Dead, and the ghouls will pop out of the ground, and I can keep, doing whatever I'm doing during. I can keep running, I should say. I can't just start using other abilities, but you can move while casting that now. The next major change is Crimson Scourge. This is a passive, and it's been changed because of the changes to Blood Boil and Pestilence. No longer will it increase the damage of Blood Boil, but its effects from targets infected with Blood Plague will now cause a 10% chance of your Blood Boil or Death and Decay to cost no runes instead of Pestilence. So just a change there to accommodate for the merger of Blood Boil and Pestilence. Improved Blood Presence will no longer increase all damage dealt by 15%. Improved Blood Presence will no longer increase rune regeneration, and it will now increase Blood Presence damage by 15%. So if you're in Blood Presence, you will now have all of your damage increased by 15%. Veteran of the Third War has been changed quite a bit. It now has a haste multi-strike chance has been increased by 10%. It increases the damage of Death Strike by 100%. This is from one of the passives. It took this effect from a passive and built it directly in. And then it also lost the stamina buff, so you no longer have that increased stamina by I think it was 9% or something. Anti-Magic Shell no longer is restricted to 50% of your health. Before, you could only absorb up to 50% of your maximum health. Now it will absorb 75% of all magical damage over the course of the entire 5 seconds. It does not matter how much it absorbs. Icebound Fortitude will now only last for 8 seconds as opposed to 12 seconds. And then the last change second to last change, excuse me. Horn of Winter will now last an hour. It no longer will have a cooldown, and it no longer generates any runic power. So it's just a straight raid buff. The last change is that Dancing Rune Weapon will now attack whatever target you have when you cast the spell. So if you cast Dancing Rune Weapon, if I were to cast Dancing Rune Weapon on the target dummy on the right here, if I switch to the target on the left, it will not switch with me. It will stay on that target until that target dies, and then it will switch over to the target that I am currently on, and it will mimic my abilities. There are several removed abilities for a Blood Death Knight. First, Blood Rites and Scent of Blood have both been removed. All of their passive effects have been baked into existing abilities. Now, this is one of those weird removals in which their passives still appear up in the top right hand corner. So if I come up here and I start using Blood Boil, which absorbed Scent of Blood, you will see Scent of Blood appear in the top right hand corner, but it will no longer appear in your tooltip or in your spellbook as a passive ability. Blood Parasites has been removed from the game, just a kind of a casualty of Blizzard kind of cutting down on spellbook bloat. Heart Strike and Rune Strike, we already discussed, have been removed from the game. Scarlet Fever has been removed, and its effects have been merged into Scent of Blood, which had its effects merged directly into Blood Boil. So there's a lot of mergers happening here for Blood Death Knights. Necrotic Strike has been removed. I know a lot of Death Knights are disappointed that this has been removed. However, just understand that basically this is something that's been removed across the board with all classes and specs. The absorb portion of the healing, any type of absorb healing ability has been removed from the game, and then the slowing of their casting speed, that has been removed from the game completely. An Arcane Mage's slow, mind-numbing poison, those types of effects have all been removed from the game. Rune of Sword Breaking, Sword Shattering, Cinder Glacier, and Nerubian Carapace have all been removed. Blizzard basically just kind of reducing how many runes you have access, and really the ones that matter are still there. And then lastly, Master of Ghouls has been removed. It's now specific to Unholy because Blood no longer has access to Raise Dead. Raise Dead has been removed from all specs except for Unholy, so you will no longer have access to that ability. There are a few glyphs in Warlords of Draenor for a Blood Death Knight. The first of these is going to be Glyph of Absorb Magic. It increases the total damage absorbed by Anti-Magic Shell by 100%, but Anti-Magic Shell no longer generates runic power. It's exclusive with Glyph of Anti-Magic Shell and Glyph of Regenerative Magic, so you're only going to be able to have one or the other active. You cannot have all three, you cannot even have two, you can only have one of them active. The next change is new glyph is going to be Glyph of Icy Runes. The Glyph of Icy Runes, you gain an additional 10 runic power when you use Chains of Ice. It's exclusive with Glyph of Chains of Ice and Glyph of the Ice Reaper. You do not have access to Glyph of the Ice Reaper, that's Unholy only, but you will have to choose between Glyph of Chains of Ice and Glyph of Icy Runes. If you want a modifier on your Chains of Ice, this is, an option open to you. There is Glyph of Outbreak. Your Outbreak spell no longer has a cooldown, but now costs runic power. Something to consider for a Blood Death Knight. I've honestly never tanked as Blood, so I don't know how popular something like this will be. For the other specs, I've generally felt that there are talents that kind of really make this kind of pointless, but it's an option for Blood Death Knights to take. Raise Ally, Glyph of Raise Ally. Your Raise Ally ability no longer costs any runic power, so you can no longer bother with wasting any runic power now because of Raise Ally, and honestly, you want to keep your runic power as a Blood Death Knight because of one of the Draenor perks. So just something there to kind of, if the raid leader calls out for a raise, a rebirth, etc., you can go ahead and use that if you have the glyph space and not waste any runic power. There is Glyph of Rune Tap, which reduces the cooldown of Rune Tap by 10 seconds, but Rune Tap reduces damage taken by 20% less. This is essentially a new glyph, but it's same name. They had to change it because Rune Tap has been changed completely, so it's a changed glyph in name basically, but it's pretty much brand new. Lastly, there is Glyph of Runic Power. Whenever you are struck by a movement impairing effect, you will generate 3 runic power every 1 second for 5 seconds. So a PvP buff there. Snares and roots are very powerful in this game, so this is a glyph worth taking if you are going to PvP on a Blood Death Knight. The Draenor perks for a Blood Death Knight are actually really cool. I kind of like them. The first of these is going to be Enhanced Bone Shield. Bone Shield has 2 additional charges. I really dislike Bone Shield, so having 2 additional charges at least makes it more bearable, in my opinion. Enhanced Death Coil, this one's really cool, and this is the reason why you're going to need to hold on to your runic power. And it is, your Death Coil also grants you Shadow of Death, increasing your maximum health by 3% for 30 seconds. When refreshed, the remaining portion is added to the new effect. So, keep using Death Coil and your health pool will keep going up. It's a great change there for Blood Death Knights. Enhanced Death Grip reduces the cooldown on Death Grip for 5 seconds. Definitely a great Draenor perk for Blood Death Knights. Allows you access to that gap closer a lot more often, so definitely great there. And then lastly, there's Enhanced Rune Tap. It reduces the recharge time of Rune Tap by 10 seconds. I do like this. It puts Rune Tap now at a 30-second recharge time. With 2 charges, that's, basically you have, 2 charges every 30 seconds or 1 every 15 seconds. But, it's still on that same cycle, so you still have to wait. If you blow both really quickly, you still have to wait around 30 seconds for the next one to pop up. That leaves us with the talents for a Blood Death Knight. Going from the top to the bottom, I already discussed that Rolling Blood has been removed from the game because Pestilence and Blood Boil have been merged into one. So Plague Bearer takes its place, and Death Coil and Frost Strike also infect your target, adding 4 seconds to the duration of Frost Fever and Blood Plague, and adding an additional stack to Necrotic Plague. Now, I will discuss Necrotic Plague when we get to the level 100 talents, but this kind of explains why I don't think Glyph of Outbreak is that great, because you have talents like this to possibly take a look at. It does compete with Plague Leech and Unholy Blight. I believe Plague Leech is still the desired glyph to take, but it is an option now, and it replaces Rolling Blood. Lichborn has been changed in that it now you will draw Unholy Energy to increase Leech by 10%. Still has the immunity to Charm, Fear, and Sleep effects, but they've basically changed it so that you can no longer heal yourself with Death Coil. You now have to leech from the target to, get that heal off. This is probably quite a bit more useful for a Blood Death Knight. It can take that damage, it already has Death Strike, and then having the extra leech will actually be useful. I don't really like this as much for the other specs of Death Knight, but it's definitely, the leech makes more sense with a Blood Death Knight. The level 60 tier has changed how it activates. Basically, all you really need to know is that nothing will really change because you are using a runic power spender that costs 30 runic power. But runic corruption and runic empowerment, both, they have a 1.5% chance per runic power to activate, as opposed to a flat 45% chance. And then same thing with Blood Tap. Every 15 runic power you spend will generate 1 blood charge instead of 2, so 30 runic power ends up being 2 blood charges, which is essentially what it was before. So just a change in how they equate things. It ends up being a nerf for Frost, but it'll stay the same for Blood Death Knights. Death Pact no longer requires your ghoul to be sacrificed to get the heal off, so there's definitely a great change there. It's just a flat heal. They had to do this because you no longer have access to that ghoul, and it would be kind of silly to have to use Army of the Dead to get a ghoul up to use Death Pact. So they changed it because of that, and it also absorbs incoming healing equal to 25% of the max health. So a little bit of a trade-off there. Level 90 tier, Desecrated Ground corrupts the ground in an 8-yard radius beneath the Death Knight for 10 seconds. While standing in this corruption, the Death Knight is immune to roots and snares. That is the major change with Desecrated Ground. It now grants immunity to roots and snares. This is a great change because Roots and Snare, as I mentioned, are really powerful in Warlords of Draenor, so I definitely like the fact that they changed this. It's definitely going to make Desecrated Ground more popular in comparison to Remorseless Winter and Gorfine's Grasp in PvP. That leaves us with the level 100 talents. The first is Defile. You defile the ground targeted by the Death Knight every 1 second. If there are enemies standing in the defile, it deals 1700 Shadow Frost damage to them and grows in radius and damage by 2.5%. Enemies standing in your Defile deal 10% less damage to you. This is now the desired talent at the moment for Death Knights in PvE. As you can see, it will grow in size. It's actually pretty cool to watch. I do believe this ability was ripped off of the Lich King, so now Death Knights have access to it. The ability on the left here is Necrotic Plague. It's a powerful disease that deals 159 Shadow Frost damage per stack every 2 seconds for 30 seconds. Each time it deals damage, it gains 1 stack, and infects another possible enemy within 8 yards if possible. You gain 2 runic power whenever a target infected with Necrotic Plague attempts to attack you, and it replaces Blood Plague and Frost Fever, and is applied by any ability which applied either. This effect cannot be refreshed. It gains 1 stack instead. I really like this ability. First of all, I think the best change is that it combines your diseases. So you only have 1 disease to worry about, which means you only have to apply 1 disease. So, it's a possibility with Blood Death Knights, but it won't be very popular because of, the massive merger of Blood Boil, Pestilence, and Rolling Blood altogether. But I'm going to show you real quick how it spreads. It really spreads just like a plague, The first target's infected, and then it infects the next target, and then those 2 infect, and then it just starts to exponentially get out of control. It goes 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, just keeps going up and infecting people, and then the stacks keep rising with each tick. It's up to 8 stacks now. So it's a pretty cool ability, but I just don't see Blood ever taking it. The last ability or talent here is Breath of Sindragosa. You continuously deal, let me start building up some runic power. You continuously deal 5300 Shadow Frost damage every 1 second to enemies in a cone in front of you within 12 yards, and affects them with Mark of Sindragosa for 6 seconds. You will continue breathing until cancelled or until runic power is exhausted. Mark of Sindragosa causes you to be healed for 10% of spell damage dealt by afflicted enemies. So, I'm going to go ahead and show this to you. Pretty powerful ability. Definitely some burst here, so I'm going to go ahead and use it, and I can continue to build up my runic power while this ability is going, so I can keep it as active as long as I want, and keep the damage going. That's why it's on a 2-minute cooldown. It is very powerful, but it is an excellent ability for Blood Death Knights to consider taking. So that's basically everything dealing with Blood Death Knights in Warlords of Draenor. They really got shuffled in Warlords of Draenor. They had a lot of abilities and passive just really mixed up and changed everywhere. So I tried to discuss all of them. I hope I did not miss anything. Otherwise, that is everything I know on Blood Death Knights. I will see you guys in the next video. Tearless out.